Thanks, Natalie. That was so beautiful, and just could really just sense God's Holy Spirit just moving and just speaking through people in that time. And if he's just, his presence is so thick this morning. And that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about today. So God's with us all the time. He never leaves us. But there are times and there are moments when like the intensity of his presence just increases. And you can just really feel him. His, the glory just comes upon you and it's like a heaviness. And you just can't do anything else except just be in his presence. So like it's already been said, this is the second part of the series on intimacy with God. And last week I talked about how Father, he wants to have an intimate relationship with him. And this is made possible by the death of Jesus. Jesus is all we need to have an intimate relationship with God. But there are things that stop us from having a real intimate relationship with him. And if you missed the talk, the video is on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, if you want to watch it again or just catch up with it. But this week I want to talk about Moses. It's said that he was somebody who spoke to God like a friend. And we too can talk to God like a friend. This is going to be a whistle-stop tour of Moses' life, and I haven't got time to go into detail about Moses. If you want to read it, then read Exodus, read Deuteronomy, read Numbers. You can find everything about him in those books. So the first 80 years of Moses' life are just found in the first 2 chapters of Exodus. So he was 80 years old when he kind of began his ministry. I'm just stating that out. Age doesn't define you. So we're going to look at Moses' first encounter with God, which is found in Exodus 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight. Why the bush does not burn up? When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. So Moses wasn't doing anything special before this encounter with God. He was just being a shepherd looking after his flock of sheep. He'd probably been in this place hundreds of times, and it's a job he's been doing hundreds of times. But God spoke to him in that ordinary moment. He suddenly realized that a bush was burning. So he went to investigate. He didn't ignore it. He saw something odd was going on. So he went to find out what was going on. So as he got closer to this bush that was burning, the bush then started speaking to him. And Moses answered. God will meet us in our ordinary, everyday lives. We just need to keep our eyes open to him. This week, so the first half of this week, I was at the Vineyard Leaders Gathering and just had time of worship and just meeting with God and getting ministry. And then from Wednesday onwards, it's just been a really intense kind of 3 days of trying to catch up on all my work and almost kind of forgot about the fact I went to a conference. I've been so busy. But I teach 1 day a week in a school. And I was just setting up my classroom, just kind of thinking, I'm back here again. This is another quick week that's just flown by. And I just felt God saying to me, in just putting out chairs, I'm here with you though. so he can meet you and talk to you when you're just setting out chairs. You know, God told him to take off his sandals because he was on holy ground. How often do we realize we're walking on holy ground? And then Moses became afraid because he realized he was talking to God. In chapter 3 and 4, there's a fascinating interaction between God and Moses. At first, it said Moses was afraid. And then God tells Moses that Moses' job is to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. No kind of little job, quite a big mission. But then this is a really interesting part. Moses, the man in verse 6, who hid his face from God because he was afraid of God, started arguing with God. Now, you don't normally argue with somebody if you're afraid of them. Moses started giving loads of reasons why he couldn't do the thing that God had called him to do. The first one is that he didn't know God's name. Moses didn't want to follow a God that he didn't know the name of. When he was scared of going to the Israelites and saying, there's this God who we don't know the name of, and he wants us to do this. You know, you're not going to inspire confidence with people if you don't know the name of the person. So he asked God for his name. And God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. This is the first time in the Bible God's name is mentioned. God is the I am. And Moses was the first person that God revealed his name to. So that was one reason kind of answered. The second reason Moses gives is that he was fearful of what the people would say. What if they didn't believe him? Who was Moses? Who was his God? So God showed Moses a couple of party tricks to convince the Israelites. So in Exodus 4, 1-9, Moses answered, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Then the Lord said to him, what's that in your hand? A staff, he replied. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. So Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran away from it. Then the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. Again, God took something ordinary, something that Moses always had with him, and did a miracle with it. He then went off and showed him a few other miracles as well. And the final reason that Moses said he couldn't do the job was that he wasn't a very good speaker. But again, God wasn't bothered by this excuse. But he said, to help you, I'll give you your brother Aaron can speak on my behalf. In this first encounter with God, Moses became a changed man. A man with a calling, a man with a job to do, and a man who had witnessed the powerful nature of God. You know, Moses wasn't afraid to argue with God. He wasn't afraid to reason with him. I think sometimes God enjoys an argument with us, or for when we question him. And the thing about arguing with God, he does eventually win. I need to learn that one. But I think when we question what he wants us to do, or what he's doing in us, it's a chance for us for him to reveal more about him to ourselves. In Genesis 32, 22, 31, we see how Jacob physically wrestled with God throughout the night. Jacob was demanding a blessing from God, and he wouldn't let God go until God blessed him. Jacob was so desperate to be blessed by God that he just kept hold of God. He didn't want to let God go. And eventually God blessed him. But he was left with a limp. Jacob names the place he had this wrestle with God, Peniel, because it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. You know, it's good to ask questions of God. I'm constantly doing it. And although I may not get an answer straight away, I do eventually get answers from God. In fact, I kind of think my prayer life, my relationship with God, is all about me asking him questions. We're told to come to God as children. And there's this age when kids constantly ask us questions, to the point we're just like, just stop up questioning us. You know, there was a time when I had my nephew and he kept asking me questions, and I got to the point, it's like, I can't listen to this. This is just, you're doing my head in. And he asked me a question that I didn't have the answer. And he said, can't you just Google it? I was like, thank you, Google. Didn't help me there. I just wanted him to be quiet. But thankfully, God has more patience than us. And he will answer our questions. You know, the type of questions I ask God are, what are you teaching me in this? What is it you're doing in me in this situation, whether that's good or bad? What do you want me to do next? Why is this person really annoying me? And what are you teaching me through this? Encountering the presence of God changes you. You cannot enter his presence and it not leave a mark on you. And we can encounter his presence and, like Jacob, our life will be spared. We are changed when we talk with Father and when we take on board what he said to us, when we are obedient to what he said. When I felt God was telling me to quit my full-time job to become self-employed, which I did 7 years ago, I argued with him for about at least a year before I eventually gave up and quit my job, not really knowing what was next. But during this time, he revealed so much about himself to me, and I learned that I trust him. And even over the last year, I've been wrestling with God about what's coming next. And I know he will win eventually. But as I'm questioning what he's doing in me, he's revealing more and more about himself and how he sees me during this time. And again, I'm learning to trust him in that. But more than being able to argue with God, Moses knew God by his name. He was on first name terms with the creator of the universe. We too are on first name terms with God. We can call him our Father. So after this encounter, Moses went back to Egypt. And, you know, he saw many times the power of God moving. He just witnessed the amazing feats that God displayed during the 10 plagues of Egypt. He witnessed the miracle of Passover and the parting of the Red Sea. When the Israelites were wandering through the desert, Moses saw how God provided for them manna, bread, and clean fresh water from unlikely places. The Israelites were also being guided by a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud. And in that fire, in that cloud, was God. God was near him the whole entire time. So we're going to skip ahead to Exodus 19. The Israelites had been out of Egypt for a couple of months now, and they were at Mount Sinai. And God called Moses from the mountain, and he explained how he was going to appear to Moses. But in order to do so, the Israelites had to prepare. They had to consecrate themselves over 3 days and were instructed not to touch the mountain. On the third day, all the Israelites and Moses were at the mountain's base when God descended on the mountain. The mountain trembled and was covered with a thick cloud of smoke as the presence of God fell on it. God called Moses to the top of the mountain, but he also warned the other Israelites not to climb the mountain, or God will kill them. Moses then went up the mountain to be with God, where he remained for 40 days. This was when God gave Moses the 10 Commandments for the first time. It's in Exodus chapter 33 when Moses finally came down the mountain. So he was up on the mountain in God's presence for 40 days. Time with God is so precious. But we always want to rush off and do the next thing. Again, I think it's to do with our culture. We live in a culture which is 24/7. It's always go, go, go. You know, we're constantly rushing around, going to the next thing. We've got things to do in a day. And when you ask somebody how they are, you know, they either tell you, I'm fine, or I'm busy. It's like being busy is this kind of norm that we need to kind of be. And I know I am so guilty of saying that, I'm busy. Oh, I'm so busy this week, it's been such a crazy busy week. But actually that's most of my weeks. Or sometimes we can use it as an excuse for not doing something. But what if we're too busy doing church, pretending to follow Jesus, that we miss him, when his presence is so strongly felt? Why is it so hard for us to stop and just be in his presence? Isn't that the most important thing we can do all day? I can't remember where this quote came from. I was reading something, and there are two types of business, somebody was saying. There's your normal, everyday busyness, and there's our religious busyness. When we're so busy doing things for church, things to make us look super holy, but we're not actually doing what's really important, which is spending time with God. What will happen if we let the presence of God interrupt and disrupt our lives? And I think that would be so incredibly freeing if we let it happen. Because that means that we are no longer bound by the pressures of the culture that's around us. It's not us neglecting our duties. The important things will still get done. It just might mean we might have a different priority. There is no such thing as wasting time in God's presence. You know, for me, there's nothing more precious than just spending hours just worshipping God. And just singing, telling God how much I love him. And I always get, when I'm in church or other events, I just get so frustrated when the worship is cut short. Because it's like, that's the most important thing we can be doing that morning, that day. In Luke 10, we read about the encounter of Mary and Martha when Jesus came to visit. You know, Martha was there. She was busy rushing around trying to serve Jesus and the disciples. She was making sure they had all the cups of tea or whatever they drank, and biscuits, you know, making sure that Jesus and the disciples were well looked after. And she was getting really annoyed with Mary, because Mary wasn't doing anything. Mary wasn't helping Martha in the kitchen. I think we've all been guilty of being Marthas. But what was Mary doing? She was just sitting at Jesus' feet, listening to him. And Jesus says this, "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." David was a king, and he had the pressures of leading a nation. But spending time with God was the most important thing for him to do. In Psalm 27, one thing I ask from the Lord, the only thing do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. We can all waste time doing all the other bits we do to try and get close to God, when all we have to do is just one thing: to sit at his feet. Remember, we don't have to do anything to earn his love, to earn our right to enter into God's presence. Jesus has done it all. We just need to choose him above everything else. In Exodus 33, it explains that Moses had a tent of meeting, which he pitched outside the Israelites' camp. And whenever Moses entered the tent, a pillar of cloud stood by the entrance to the tent. God lived in this cloud. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshipped, each at their entrance to their tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. Then Moses would return to the camp. But his young aide, Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. It says that God spoke to Moses like a friend, face to face like a friend. We too can speak to God like a friend. We can reason with God like a friend. We can chat for hours to God like a friend. We can sit in silence with God as a good friend. We can laugh with God. We can share jokes with him like we do like a friend. We can use our own words that we would use if we were speaking to our own friends. We do not have to use big religious words or long prayers. Even when we're praying in public, we can use ordinary words. When we chat with our friends, they don't sound like some kind of Shakespearean monologue. But sometimes I think our prayers can be like that. God isn't impressed by our big words. He's impressed by our heart. Jesus tells his parable in Luke 18. To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax man. I fast twice a week and I give 1/10 of all I have. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For those who will exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. God cares more about what's going on in our hearts than what we would like to portray is going on in our hearts to other people, or even to ourselves. We can be real with God. We can be honest with him. We can give him all our joy, all our hope, all our love for him, but we can also give him our anger. We can give him our disappointment. We can give him everything. He knows it all anyway. And sometimes we just need to admit it to him and to ourselves. Let's be more real with God when we pray with him. It says in 1 Samuel 17:7, the Lord does not look at things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So we can be like a friend to God. We can be real with him. We can be vulnerable with him. And he loves us. He's not going to judge you. He's not going to condemn you. He's just going to love you. I just want to finish this talk by looking at the last little bit in Exodus. So, just to give you a quick recap. At the beginning, Moses heard God speaking to him in a burning bush. He witnessed God do countless miracles. You know, he talked to God like a friend. He had powerful encounters with the presence of God up until this point. But that wasn't enough for Moses. You know, I would be so happy if I just experienced God's presence just once, like Moses did. But Moses wanted more. He wanted to encounter God more. He wanted more of God's glory. He wanted more of God's presence. Have you had enough of God? Or do you want more? Are you desperate for him? Let's just have a look at this little encounter. So it's Exodus 33. Moses said to the Lord, "You have been telling me, lead these people. But you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your way so that I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people." The Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Then Moses said, "If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth?" And the Lord said to Moses, "I will do the very thing that you have asked me, because I am pleased with you and I know you by name." Then Moses said, "Now show me your glory." Now, I think I said this at the start, but I know God is always with me. He's always there. But there are times in my life when I have experienced the presence of God so strongly that the only thing that I've been able to do was lie on the floor because of the weight of his glory has been so strong. And I think the reason we don't experience his presence so much like that is because nothing would get done. The first time I experienced this was I was 12 years old. I was on a Christian holiday camp. And it was the first time I experienced the Holy Spirit. People were falling over in the Spirit. And I kind of knew it was from God, even though I'd never heard about Holy Spirit moving in this way. But I was like, I'm not going to fall over like these people. That's just weird. And I told this to God. And do you know what? I've never fallen over in the Spirit. I've always been able to put myself on the floor. But it was at 12 during this encounter that I started seeing visions and started seeing more into the spiritual realm. You know, this first encounter with God, it changed me. I wasn't the same. A more recent encounter was during the second lockdown. And during this one, I was not in a good place. I'd lost more work and just frustrated, and, you know, I hated being on my own. And I just sat at my piano and just took my frustration and anger out on my piano and out on God. And during this moment, it was just so precious. I just felt God just sit there and just hold me. And I think I just sat on the floor just crying and just being comforted by God. But it was literally as if I just had somebody hold me. So you don't have to be with loads of people to encounter God. Then last year I went to David's tent, and it's 3 days of non-stop worship. And it was so incredible last year. I was worshipping with 5,000 other Christians who were so desperate to worship God under one roof after such a long time of just being in isolation and worshipping God. There's something about worshipping together in corporate worship. And I can't remember the night it was, but it was the early hours of one morning. And I was in the big top just worshipping, and I was getting cold. I needed the loo. And I was thinking, this is probably a good time to go back to my tent and get a few hours rest. And so I kind of was walking back to my tent. I was almost there. And then all of a sudden, I just felt the presence of God so strongly. And I just had to lie on the floor, on the grass. It was early hours of the morning, freezing cold. The grass was wet from the dew. And I was just lying on the floor, and all I could see was Jesus' beautiful eyes. And it was just so precious. And I don't know how long I was on the floor. Eventually, I did manage to get myself back into my tent, into bed. But everyone can have those encounters with God. You just have to want them and be open to them. David writes in Psalm 34, "Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you his holy people. For those who fear him lack nothing." We quite often sing a song which has a line, "Your name is like honey on my lips." But do we mean it? Are we so hungry for God that we can't get enough of him? The more I experience God's glory, the more I want it, like Moses. It's like having a thirst that we cannot satisfy. It's like opening, some sweets and going, I'm just going to have one. But before you know it, you've eaten the whole bag. Do we crave God in the same way as our body craves sugar? The same way our bodies crave caffeine or carbs or alcohol or any other thing that you can be addicted to. Are we addicted to his presence? God's presence is always with us, but there are occasions when the intensity of his presence goes up. And it always amazes me in these moments when just the weight of his glory, feels like it's pinning me to the ground. But the fact, like Jacob, I can come out of these moments alive, just makes me want to love God more. Too often we take the phrase, fear the Lord, and mean that we've got to be terrified of him because he's a scary God and will punish you if you get things wrong. But that's not the case. Jesus took all our punishment. And yes, God is powerful and he's holy, but he loves you. He's not going to punish you. The word fear translated in Hebrew is yareh. I probably got that wrong, which does mean danger, but it also means awe. It means reverence. It means wonder. It means amazement, astonishment, gratitude, admiration, and worship. Fear of God is seeing God's beauty in everything. How desperate are you for more of God? When was the last time you experienced God's presence?